Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to unpack a genuinely brilliant and honestly kind of terrifying framework by Vinay Vijay Raut. It's all about why your super high, comfortable retention rate might actually be masking a massive business vulnerability. If you've ever looked at your churn dashboard and felt, a false sense of security, you're definitely going to want to pay close attention to this.
Picture this scenario. You're sitting in a quarterly review. The product team throws a big number up on the screen showing a 92% retention rate. The whole room erupts in applause, right? It feels like a massive win. But here's the kicker. Nobody thought to ask the harder question. Retained for what reason? Well, fast forward 3 months later and a competitor launches a free tier, just marginally better than yours. The result? Nearly a fifth of that so-called retained user base just vanished, gone within a single billing cycle. The number on the screen was real, but it literally didn't mean what everyone assumed it meant.
So this brings us to a really crucial and honestly pretty uncomfortable question. Is your churn dashboard lying to you? It's a realization that challenges literally everything we assume about product growth. Because right now, your metrics might be telling you the what, but they are utterly failing to tell you the why.
Here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. First, we'll cover the retention illusion. Second, we're breaking down behavior versus decision. Third, we dive into the 5 retention rings. Fourth, a reality check with Project Flow. And finally, upgrading your dashboards.
Let's jump right into part 1, the retention illusion.
Here's the dangerous gap we need to look at. Most teams out there are tracking survival, not loyalty. Think about it. Your retention rate really only answers one very basic question. Did the customer still have an account last month? It tells us absolutely nothing about why they stuck around. I mean, sure, someone might stay because your product is completely replaceable, but they might also stay because switching costs are just a huge pain, or literally just because they forgot to cancel their subscription. Most dashboards are built to answer, are we losing people? But listen, that is a finance question, that is not a strategy question.
Moving on to part 2, behavior versus decision. To fix our metrics, we desperately need a complete paradigm shift in how we define customer relationships. Because retention and loyalty, they are not points on the same scale. Retention is a behavior. It's driven by inertia. It simply measures whether someone stayed put. Loyalty, on the other hand, is a decision. It's driven by actual preference. It measures whether a user would actively choose you all over again if the friction to leave completely disappeared tomorrow.
Let's look at a classic example, a typical gym with a strict 12-month contract. Now, they boast excellent retention on paper, but honestly, they have incredibly mediocre loyalty. People are staying because they are contractually trapped, right? It's just way too hard to leave. They aren't staying because they actually want to be running on those treadmills every morning.
Now contrast that, Jim, with a really high-quality newsletter. With a newsletter, there's absolutely zero lock-in. You can hit that unsubscribe button in half a second. And yet, if that newsletter has a 60% open rate over 3 straight years, that is a business relying on genuine preference rather than friction. So if you only track standard retention, you're always going to overvalue businesses built on friction and totally undervalue the ones built on true loyalty.
All right, on to part 3, the 5 retention rings. To accurately measure preference over friction, the author introduces this brilliantly structured framework. Because customer commitment isn't just binary, it exists in 5 concentric layers, moving from the absolute weakest signal of commitment right in the center, radiating outward to the strongest signal at the outer edge. If you're only measuring that inner ring, you're basically just building a vanity dashboard. Let's break down each layer.
The innermost ring is activation retention. The core question here is simple. Did they actually come back after the very first value moment? You track this through metrics like second session return rates or time to second use. As the author points out, this is the absolute floor. It's the weakest signal, but it is the foundation that literally everything else is built upon.
Moving outward, ring 2 is habit retention. Here, we're asking, has usage actually become routine? This is where you track stickiness metrics like daily active users over monthly active users. Why? Because routine usage is a way better predictor of durability than raw login counts will ever be.
Next up is ring 3, value retention. We need to know, is the relationship actually growing or is it shrinking? We measure this using net revenue retention, or NRR, and expansion to contraction ratios. This right here is the critical layer where you finally separate the customers who are merely settling for your product from the ones who are actively investing further into it.
Ring 4 dives into emotional loyalty. Would they recommend you completely unprompted? Here, we track Net Promoter Score trends and organic referral rates.
And this is such a vital layer to monitor because customer attitude almost always leads actual behavior by roughly 1 to 2 quarters. Basically, if emotional loyalty drops, churn is absolutely coming. It just hasn't hit your spreadsheet quite yet.
Finally, the outermost layer is resilience retention. Do they stay when a rival makes it incredibly easy to leave? You measure this by looking at win-back rates after competitor promotions. This is literally the only ring that tests loyalty under real tangible pressure, rather than just assuming loyalty exists in a vacuum.
Well, let's look at part 4, the project flow reality check.
Now, frameworks are just theory until they're applied in the real world. So let's anchor this with a composite B2B SaaS example. Let's call them Project Flow. Project Flow's leadership was hyper-focused on one single number for their quarterly reports, a very, very comfortable 94% monthly logo retention. Everything looked fantastic on the surface.
But a totally hidden reality emerged when the team finally instrumented all 5 rings. Yes, logo retention was 94%, but their value retention, that net revenue retention, was entirely flat at 1.02x. And even worse, their NPS trend wasn't just low, it was actively declining, dropping down to a 31.
As the author brilliantly puts it, the 94% headline had been hiding a customer base that stayed by default, not by preference. Because leadership was completely blind to this fact, when a competitor ran a heavy discount campaign, Project Flow suddenly lost a totally disproportionate share of its so-called stable accounts. The resilience just wasn't there.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Upgrading Your Dashboard.
So how do we prevent this exact scenario from happening to you without needing some completely new, super complex analytics stack? Well, you don't need magic, you just need visibility. You can build a simple single-view dashboard reviewed monthly that puts leading indicators for all 5 rings right next to your acquisition metrics. Notice how we aren't just looking at a single proxy metric anymore. We can actually see second session returns alongside DAO over MAO stickiness, net revenue retention, and those NPS trends, all in one cohesive snapshot.
You can actually apply this right away. First, take a hard look at your current dashboard and identify which single ring your headline metric actually measures. Spoiler alert, it's usually just ring 1 or 2. Second, add one leading indicator per ring. Even a rough one is totally fine. Don't wait around for a perfect data system. Third, segment your retention by acquisition channel, because loyalty distributes very differently across them. And finally, run a quarterly resilience check. Sit down with your team and honestly model out what would happen to your base if your biggest competitor cut prices by 20% tomorrow.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. The customers you should be worrying about right now, they aren't the ones who just left. The real danger is the customers currently on your books who are just staying by default. They are the ones who would leave the exact instant it became easy. So challenge your dashboard today. What does your retention number actually measure? And more importantly, would it survive a better offer? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to go map out your 5 rings today.